Many of you have been asking me to make a video on my thoughts about building a base. It is finally here. Honestly, it was really difficult to make because if I try to cover everything, I run the risk of just saying a bunch of stuff you guys already know. But if I focus only on the unique things about my base without covering the broader subjects, then it's just a bunch of random thoughts. So I did my best, and here it is. When you are designing your base, there are 3 things you need to keep in mind. First, there's the Horde. If you're an experienced player, you probably already know everything there is to know about the Horde, but let me address the newer players real quick. If you see this, do not enter your base. If you do, dozens of your walls will be laid to waste. It doesn't matter what level your walls are. However, if you wait until they're done, then only one single outer wall will be destroyed. This brings me to my first piece of advice and the only advice that I will give you in regards to the zombie horde. Make sure all of your outer walls are level 1. This will save you a lot of resources in the long run. Now, some people deal with this problem by not building any walls at all, which this isn't a bad tactic because until multiplayer is released, there are no consequences to not having walls. On the other hand, if Last Day on Earth is speaking the truth when they say that they are going to try not to have to reset everything, then those people without walls will have a lot of catching up to do. The second thing you need to consider in base construction is your workflow. When you come home from gathering resources, it is extremely helpful to have a good workflow to your base. In my opinion, the most convenient thing you can do is to have a door right in front of your main spawn point. Then I suggest starting your workflow from that spawn point. I think the beginning of your workflow should start with your woodworking room because it's the most common resource you'll need to get, and then your stone, followed by your furnaces, and then your sewing machines. But honestly, it is really up to what makes the most sense in your mind. The most important aspect of making your base have a good workflow is that you remember where everything is and that you develop a system for putting everything away quickly. If you don't create a system or you don't remember where you put things, then you'll find yourself wasting a lot of time running back and forth putting things away after each run. I suggest building lots of chests. The more chests you have, the more you can separate things by type, which is helpful for remembering where they are. A few other suggestions I have, which may be pretty obvious to some of you, are put your furnaces near your workbench, put your shower and your rain catcher together. I put 4 bottles in my rain catcher, and then every time I visit, I drink 2 of them and then shower, and then put the 4 empty bottles back in the rain catcher. Also, put your tanning and meat drying racks together because when you have one of those resources, you will probably have the other one as well. Lastly, I would suggest putting your gardens next to your fire pits. As I mentioned earlier, this is probably pretty obvious to some, but I felt like I had to mention it. The last thing that you need to keep in mind when you are building your base is the least important right now, but will eventually be the most important. Protecting yourself from players trying to get your stuff. This will eventually be the most important thing about your base. It doesn't matter how awesome you are at playing this game or how well you've collected resources. If it is easy to steal from you, then you are always going to be poor. I have 4 suggestions on designing your base to protect yourself against other players. Tip number 1. Hide everything. Information is power. The more they know about your base, the easier it will be for them to figure out your strategy. This is why I use what I'm calling the Great Wall strategy. This wall around my base is helpful against the zombie horde because it lets me regulate which walls I have to repair, but it is only the 3rd and least important reason I use this strategy. The first reason I built it is because when someone approaches my base, it is going to look like this. And then when they go to the effort of destroying one of my walls, my base is going to look like this. I'm forcing them to use C4 even just to get a peek inside. This brings us to tip number 2 and the second reason that I use the Great Wall tactic. Make them spend more than you do. When you look at the traps that they're going to have for us to make, they're expensive. Having a minefield on the outside of your base will allow any punk just wandering around to set off your traps. This will cost you a lot of resources replenishing your traps, and that guy can just come back and get his stuff if he even had stuff in the first place. If you are mapping out your future base, make sure your traps are reserved for only serious invaders by making them have to spend resources like C4 to even get to your traps. If you do this, then you might even be able to make your base gain resources for you. For example, I'm hoping to have a line of landmines here with turrets dispersed among them. When a committed invader uses C4 to break through my inner wall and tries to take out my turrets, which I imagine he'd be prepared for, if I can set it up to where he'll hit a landmine at the same time he's getting shot by a turret, he'll probably not be able to heal fast enough to avoid dying. This would leave his body in my base with turrets guarding it, which means I have a greater chance of logging in time to gather his equipment. Tip 3. Put yourself in their shoes. If you were your enemy, how would you outsmart yourself? This may seem basic, but a lot of people don't actually sit back and try to think through the eyes of their enemy. I used this approach when I played Clash of Clans several years ago, and it allowed me to get to the top even though I refused to spend money like most of the other top players. I had level 7 walls when my competition had level 12 walls, and often I would still beat them because of this mentality. I would sit back and look at my base and I would think, how would I attack this? And then I'd make adjustments, and then I'd do it again, and then I'd make more adjustments. I would also watch replays. I don't know if Last Day on Earth will offer replays, but you will be able to see where they busted through your walls. When you see a pattern, compensate for it. Lastly, put your most valuable stuff in your most inner rooms. I've got my medical table, my woodworking, my stone, and eventually my radio tower, all in outer rooms because they use and produce the least valuable items. Meanwhile, I keep my food and armor and weapons in a place that they would have to break through 4 walls to get to them. Well guys, that's everything I can think of to share. I hope that helps or was at least interesting. I've been getting a lot of new subscribers every day. A lot of you have not gone back and seen some of my earlier videos, probably because you aren't sure which ones are out of date or not. So I've made a new playlist that has all of my videos that are currently up to date and relevant.